For the Monday, September 10th, 2018 regularly scheduled meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission. Could we please have the roll call?
Commissioner Coronado?
Here.
Commissioner Schwartzbacher? Here. Commissioner Reynolds?
Here.
Commissioner Rudnicki?
Here.
Commissioner Almond? Here. Commissioner Breidenbaugh?
Here.
Commissioner Miller?
Here.
And tonight we have absent Commissioner Bolt and Commissioner Stallman.
And if Mr. Stallman is watching on TV, which I strongly suggest in order to, in lieu of sleeping aids, hi Bruce and good luck to you. You have before you the agenda. Are there any changes, flips, anything of that nature?
Not here.
Not
here.
Seeing none. You also have the minutes from our previous meeting. Do I have a motion or comments?
I move to approve, based on the recording secretary's certification, the August 27, 2018 action minutes for August 27, 2018 regular meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission.
We have a second?
Second.
Sherry's got the second. Please vote. And if you weren't here last meeting, please don't vote.
Votes unanimous and the motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Next up is public comment. For general business or non-agenda related items. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please give your name, your address, or in lieu of your address, give your district number, or in lieu of that, let me know how many blocks you live away from the from council chambers. Again, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. We expect the discourse to be civil. When you have 30 seconds left to speak, our recording secretary will hold up the yellow card, for example. Thank you. When your 3 minutes is up, she will hold up the red card. We have one speaker that signed up, Jeannie Erickson.
Jeannie Erickson, I live in District 1. I didn't count how many blocks it was, but I think it might be about 12. I drove in a car.
Okay.
Just wanted to bring up the fact that I don't know if there's going to be any public comment tonight. If the developers, owners of this property that the rezone is for have added to their...
There will be, we will open up the public comment again for the Bellevue Centennial Square.
Wonderful. Okay, well, since I'm up here, I'm going to give you one paragraph. I wanted to make a comment regarding something that was said at the last meeting 2 weeks ago. It was brought up that there's a 12-story tall building west of Santa Fe. Just because there's a 12-story tall building west of Santa Fe, as far as I know, it's the only one in the city of Littleton that is that tall. Does not mean that's what we want our whole neighborhood to look like. When there's one building that tall, it does not mean that all the rest of the retail should be that tall. And that's all I have to say at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. That ends the people that have signed up. Is there anyone else wishes to speak that hasn't signed up on unrelated items on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. General business, we have none. We have 2 public hearings tonight. Both of them, the Planning Commission is advisory to City Council. First item, PC Resolution 22-2018, a resolution of the Planning Commission regarding an ordinance to amend the official zoning map to change the zoning of a 5.05 acre area known as 2717, 2727, and 2767 West Bellevue Avenue from B2 Community Business District to B3 General Business District. We have a staff presentation. By the way, this is a continuance of a hearing that we held 2 weeks ago.
Good evening.
Just want to confirm that the screen in front of you is live. It is? You can see the screen in front of you here?
There's nothing.
No.
Can we just make a general comment, just so people in the audience know that the projector is not working this evening? So we did make some handouts of the staff presentation, which is in the electronic packet online. But that's what those handouts were for. And so, but the commissioners, you will be able to see it on that screen. That part is working. So hopefully everyone will be able to follow along. Thanks. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Jocelyn. My name is Rob Haig. I'll be representing the Community Development Department for the City of Littleton. As you stated, this is the September 10th meeting. It's a continuation of Resolution 2018, continued from August 27th, 2018. The Planning Commission voted on the August 27th to continue the hearing to today in order for staff to provide additional information to the Commission. Just to get us refreshed and all on the same page, this is the existing site. The site as a whole is known as Centennial Square. However, the subject property to this rezoning is the right-hand side or the eastern portion of the Centennial Square. Indicated here, everything to the right of the green line, REZ 18-0001 is the docket number for the rezoning. On the subject property currently is a single-story shopping center consisting of a variety of retail and commercial uses, several vacant tenant spaces, and an empty pad site. In addition, concurrently being reviewed with this rezoning is a sketch plan, SP 18-0005, which proposes to reface some of the existing buildings here. No changes in square footage there. It's simply kind of refacing and updating the architecture on these existing structures. And additionally, SDP 18-0007, which is a site development plan to propose a new structure, new tenant space in the northwestern corner of the subject property, or excuse me, off of the subject property, but in Centennial Square. That portion and the SDP and the sketch plan, even though they're being reviewed concurrently, are not dependent on the approval of this rezoning to continue. It would be continued, are continuing their review process at this time. The proposed rezoning of the subject property, again indicated here on the right-hand side by the heavier dashed line, is a rezoning of an approximately 5.05 acre area. The reason I say area and not property is because that 5.05 acres includes some section of right-of-way. The code requires that when a rezoning occur, it does extend out to the center line of any adjacent right-of-way. This rezoning is from B2 to B3, and the change being made here between the August 27th hearing and the hearing today, staff's changing a recommendation to retain in the area that's being rezoned the existing B2 floor area ratio of 2:1. So the surrounding zoning, this will hopefully answer some of the questions that came up at the last hearing. As you know, there's a 180,000 square foot minimum freestanding zoning district requirement. So what that means is the code states that any rezoning cannot create a freestanding zoning district of less than 180,000 square feet. This was in consideration because the commission was talking about some alternatives and what if the entire shopping center, Centennial Square, were to be zoned B2. Would that leave an orphan parcel to the north of Centennial Square that was less than 180,000 square feet? Staff measured this area and found that the area zoned B3 north of Centennial Square is 209,000 square feet, so that the whole property could be zoned B2 without creating an orphan parcel. However, staff finds that there are some advantages to zoning B3, one of which is that there no longer is the provision allowing for residential dwellings on any B3 zoned property. Additionally, the proposal seeks to create a larger contiguous B3 zoning district that kind of surrounds this IP zone district. Additionally, the property is surrounded by PDR zoning as well as PDC to the south. The zoning map, kind of shown here, this is our online version, would track the staff's recommended condition of limiting the FAR on the right-hand side, would refer to this rezoning case, which specifically calls out the legal description of the area to be rezoned, and that's how that FAR limitation would move forward with the zoning as the city continues to develop. This FAR difference would not impact platting across these lots, primarily because even though there is that condition on the subject property to limit the FAR, it's still B3 zoning. And we'll discuss that further in a few slides. So the site location and the surrounding, so this just kind of details some of the floor area ratios in the surrounding areas. A, which is the Centennial Square Shopping Center, which does include the area of the rezoning, with the proposed additional floor area through the concurrently reviewed SDP would be 0.27 to 1 FAR actual, even though there's 2 to 1 and 3 to 1 allowed currently. To the southeast, the Riverside Downs PDC would be 0.3 to 1 maximum FAR. That's what's allowed in the PDC. And in that area, currently 0.23 to 1 is what's actually developed there. The Centennial Downs PDC is 0.7 to 1 maximum FAR. Between the different SDPs that were approved at different times, I could not identify a very accurate number, so I did not put one. However, it's in much less than the 0.7 to 1 maximum FAR that's allowed in that zoning district. Similarly, D is the Riverside PDC. This is the location of the Walgreens. This allows for a maximum of 3 to 1 FAR and currently developed to an actual FAR of 0.13 to 1. Additionally, because it does stand out and everyone has seen it, the Centennial Downs PDR high-rise building, known as River Point, does not actually have a maximum FAR. So in residential development, things are done differently. Typically, they're done by the amount of units allowed per acre. And additionally, this sub-area within the PDR does have an allowable 253 units at 51 units per acre. Additionally, that PDR put in place a maximum height of 155 feet. This is much higher than the surrounding PDC or PDR, which indicates that at the original time of this zoning, it was intended for a high-rise to be located in this area. Additionally, the subject property and its neighboring property that make up the Centennial Square Shopping Center are approximately 357,000 square feet, approximately 8.25 acres. So as another part of this comparison, just to look at the existing development pattern in the surrounding areas, particularly the B3 zone districts along Bellevue Avenue. The subject property is highlighted here in red and located to the east across the Platte River. Our two blue boxes, which we'll look at in slightly more detail here, are the other areas that kind of are closest in similarity to this subject property and the development pattern. So these are the nearby B3 zone districts. Based on pulling previous site development plans that were approved, again, we didn't look at pulling the footprints, looked at the actual approved SDPs. We did find that the FAR, even when allowed to be up to 3 to 1, the existing development pattern has not reached that point. In fact, even the Lowe's development, which you can see on the kind of the center of the screen, the large building does have a large footprint, is actually only 0.34 to 1 FAR. Otherwise, this is mostly single story with some two-story commercial and business built in or, that are also constructed. Includes some office space and some smaller retail and service facilities as well. So to discuss more about what could happen on this property, so the B3 zoning district, as proposed, would spread across the whole Centennial Square Shopping Center. Even though the property would have half being 3 to 1, half being 2 to 1, it would act and exist as a B3 zone district. This means that zone lots could extend across this imaginary boundary between the FAR, since it's not a zoning district boundary, and that is currently the zone district boundary now. Additionally, structures could extend across this separation between 3 to 1 and 2 to 1. For the FAR. The current SDP and sketch plans comply with all zoning regulations as they exist now. With B3, they would even only further comply with the zoning regulations. The limited FAR, again, would be tracked on the zoning map. and would be calculated at an STP phase. So when a property would be developed, staff would have to look at either side of the development if it does cross this line between the FAR that's allowed and conduct that calculation. This just shows a build out here. The line in yellow, it would be a potential subdivision that would combine this central building pad site that is currently kind of that awkward split building that was the center of a lot of discussion at the hearing previously. And it's just a hypothetical situation, but does show something that could occur. Currently, this type of subdivision to recreate this would be first be a minor subdivision. There is a possibility of an administrative plat currently in the code. However, that requires the calculations be done to ensure consistency with the existing block face based on some rough preliminary calculations. I don't think that this would be eligible for that administrative plat process and would require a preliminary and final plat. Preliminary plat would be reviewed at the staff level and the final plat would ultimately be approved by council in either consent or general business. So staff does find that the application meets the criteria of approval and therefore recommends forwarding a recommendation of approval to council of ordinance 32-2018 with the following condition of approval: that the B3 general business zoning district on the subject properties have a maximum floor to lot area ratio of 2:1, which would match the current zone district in B2. That concludes staff presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions of staff? 30.
Rob, I know it's in Englewood, but do you know what the maximum floor area ratio is for the King Soopers site?
I do not. Looking at the site, it does appear to match what's similar. You know, it's mostly a parking lot, but I can't say exactly.
Okay, that's all.
Hey, Rob, I have a question, though it might be Steve who answers it. So at the last study session, last session we had where we had asked about the possibility of retaining the floor to area ratio of 2.1, one of those sudden questions that you hadn't had time to research, and now it's here and acceptable. I'd love to hear the process that allowed it. From where we had been said no last time, and now it's here as a yes. Thanks.
I can attempt to answer that, and then Steve can input. So if you remember last time, the commission had several questions around a variety of topics that we were unable to answer based on we hadn't done some of that research, and we felt that what we needed to do to give you the information was to present all of this information that Rob presented to you this evening so that you could make a valid decision and make it on the data that we presented in front of you. So that was generally the reason why we didn't feel that you had enough information last time. So we wanted to make sure you had all that adequately provided to you this evening to consider it.
That's slightly different than what I asked. I do hear what you're saying, and I really appreciate the presentation this time with the extra detail and the added information. I do like that. I like the details. It helps to make our decision, I think. My question was more related to when we had put a motion out and then asked if we could put a condition on to make it so that the FAR would only be 2.1 instead of the 3.1. We were told no, and now coming back, it's yes. And I'm delighted with that, but I was just curious, because again, when you have time to research, you can get an answer for what seems at first a no is now a yes. And that was more what my question was.
Commissioner, members of the commission, when this came to you initially, the application was simply to make the adjustments, and it was based on discussion at the last commission meeting that we looked at whether we could expand this by adding conditions, and after looking at that, we determined that we could, and that's the reason for this these conditions now. Sometimes we'll get an application in where we will negotiate conditions before it even comes to you. But normally with a straight zoning district like this, based on your input, the staff went back and looked at conditions. And it's well within the staff's ability to do that and recommend conditions to you, as it is within your ability to recommend those same conditions to the city council.
Robin, since we are opening up the public hearing again, the applicant can also address your question.
Sure.
Okay. No, not right now. Just have a seat. Thank you. Anything else, Robin?
No, that's it, thanks.
Okay, Jason.
No questions at this time.
Sherry?
No questions at this time.
John?
None from me.
Just curious, I appreciate the changing of the FAR to 2 to 1. Does the open space requirement of 20% also come into play, or is that sort of off the table, or is that assumed because of the FAR is reduced?
Not as currently proposed. Currently, the FAR would shift to what's allowed the B3 zone
10%.
district. Correct. So there's no currently any recommended condition to keep that the same as the B2 zone district.
Just have one comment. On page 3 of the staff report, towards the bottom, I'll quote, one commissioner expressed concern about allowing outdoor storage mini warehouse use on the property as part of the rezoning request. That was my comment. It was only meant as a question. It was not a concern. It is an allowable use in a B3 district. It could be a reasonable use in the back portion of that lot. I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't a concern. It was a curiosity question.
Well, thank you for that clarification, and one of the reasons we didn't add another condition to limit any of the uses. So thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you. Would the applicant like to add anything? Now you can come up. You know the rules.
My apologies for that, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. It was out of order. Good evening, Commissioners. Jessica Elizade on behalf of Armstrong Capital. Just a couple of things that we wanted to share with you. So the first is, I did want to just address your question. In addition to serving as counsel for a number of developers in all shapes and sizes with all sorts of different projects, I also serve as city attorney for a number of municipalities, our firm serves as city attorney, so we often deal with these same issues. There are a couple of reasons that you can't necessarily answer that on the fly in a straight zone district. The first is that, to be quite candid, a condition in a straight zone district is highly unusual in that regard, and so it's not something that would normally come before council to have to decide on the fly. The second thing is that while some things are quickly or easily conditioned, even the FAR densities or other things, it's contingent on other areas of your own code, and every municipality is a little bit different. So I'm not going to speak on your council's behalf, but my guess is that he was erring on the side of prudence for you, so that in the event that you move forward with a vote for whatever reason, that you weren't subject to challenge later on. Just a, So we wanted to share with you, you had asked a little bit about what this might look like, and in a zoning hearing, we don't always do that, but I thought to satisfy some curiosity for you all to know the kind of development that Armstrong does and to take a look at some examples of their quality. Now, while this is not necessarily indicative of exactly what you're going to get, it will speak to the kind of work that they do. I may need some technical assistance getting to, is it on the home page? Right here? And actually, if you'll indulge me with, while I don't do all of the development, my client could speak to that better if that's all right with you.
Good evening again. Jared Armstrong with Armstrong Capital Development, address 4643 South Ulster Street, Denver, Colorado, Suite 240. And appreciate the opportunity to be here again tonight to cover a few things that may have that did come up last time, and I think would probably be appropriate to give a little more context to some of our feedback and some of our reaction. Obviously, we've heard, I think, concerns about 12-story retail buildings and substantial amount of density on sites here that, frankly, just is not what we do. And so that's what I'm here to kind of give you a little bit more of an overview of. That said, I'm going to try to, I think I just pressed down here. Yep, there we go. So our firm here, which has been in Denver for the last 12 years, is a local firm here. We have a long-term perspective on our projects. We love the idea of taking Class C, what we call Class C neglect, and converting it into Class A improvements. We see things like modern materials and design, attractive unified signage, walkable urban appeal and amenities, and then really what we truly value, and that's a pride of ownership. We think it's valuable from our perspective. We hope it's valuable from the city's perspective, and we heard a lot about how it's valuable to the communities in which we work within. So that being said, move on to a couple of projects here that we've recently completed. This is a project down in Parker. I'm assuming that we're all looking at the same. It's got a Tokyo Joe's on it. That's a project there, terrific outdoor area there. I think that was a concept that came up. It's a big part of what we try to do. You live in Colorado, let's take advantage of it. So we definitely do that. So we've got outdoor areas there that are oftentimes accentuated with seating, obviously umbrellas, some signage, some fun landscape areas. In this particular case, we've got some cool architectural features there. I think they kind of give it a little prominence. Obviously, that's not a second story, so let's not go that route. It's just a function of, I think, a compelling, call it a tower feature that gives a little bit more architectural flavor than your standard parapet would. Moving on here, here's just another example. You've got outdoor lighting, you've got outdoor seating. Again, it's your Class A type of retail there. This is all single story. Here's a project in Lakewood that we redid at the corner of Colfax and Wadsworth. You can kind of see there on the picture on the left, we introduced some graphics, some murals and whatnot to really create this fun outdoor plaza area. This is a site that sits literally on the corner of Colfax and Wadsworth, and if you can picture that, it's a very heavily trafficked intersection. So to kind of do something there to create an environment that was inviting to all the pedestrian traffic that we have in and around that area. There was recently a Wadsworth, a light rail station on Wadsworth. We came up with some really cool and fun features there. As you can see in the picture on the right there, we've got some outdoor string lighting, again, to create that ambiance and that feel that really, I think, the community received well. Here's just another example. This is a project up in Lafayette. In this particular case, it's an end cap with the noodles there. Again, they've got a fairly large outdoor seating area. Some of our retailers we've seen actually create these indoor-outdoor kind of connectivity there. It's pretty cool. It's a nice feature, again, when the weather's nice, as it so often is here in Colorado. So very proud of these propositions. Here's actually a redevelopment of a project in Highlands Ranch. It was the conversion of an old bank building, which was on the verge of becoming empty, and frankly, Class C neglect would be a very good characterization of this property, in which we took and said, hey, look, how can we respin this? There's obviously certain limitations in terms of what you can do, so you can still see some of the old building, but I think there's some added features there that really kind of create something neat and frankly much more appealing than what was there previously. And then lastly, I think to reinforce the contrast between the images that I just showed you and that which is there now, we think we're stepping off on an exercise. We're starting a process here, I think, to really convert that which is there into something that resembles what we've done in the past, and something that I know came up in the last time. What does the community get out of it? And I think the reality is that the community is going to get something that is attractive, appealing, someplace that they want to go, someplace they feel is safe. Another concept that came up was just the fact that you walk across the project, you're taking your life in your own hands as it stands right now. So there's some things that we plan to do there that really create a cohesive commercial center that I think is going to behoove not only the city but also the neighboring community that will find it valuable. So with that was kind of my brief presentation, and hopefully answered a few more, or maybe added a little more color to some of the narrative that we provided the last time. Happy to answer questions now, or
any questions for the applicant? Go ahead.
Would like to just confirm on the floor area ratio that the applicant is finding that the proposed restriction is okay.
Yes.
I have no questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll open it up to public comment. Again, the same rules apply. We expect a civil discourse. Give your name, address, district number, how many blocks away, how many miles you drove.
Sir, we didn't quite, there was one more statement. I think
Oh,
was part
thought
of
you were
it,
done.
And I didn't realize that. I apologize.
No, I was
Okay, just a quick statement. We actually, in addition to agreeing, waive the additional floor area. So I'd just like to enter into the record that that is a voluntary waiver on the part of the applicant.
All right, to continue, you have 3 minutes to speak. Yellow card when there's 30 seconds left, red card when your 3 minutes are up. We didn't have a sign-up sheet. We didn't know we were going to open up the public hearing again as of 45 minutes ago. Anyone wish to speak on this topic?
No one's telling me, but I'm coming down. Hello again, Jeannie Erickson, District 1. Thank you to the 5 of you who voted to take another look at this and ask for a rezone and look for some more information that staff could possibly provide to make us aware of what exactly we would be giving up or giving away. I still think B2 zoning for this entire property is the correct one for this neighborhood. I do appreciate the fact that they're willing to put the waiver in for the FAR. I attended all 3 of the Bellevue Corridor meetings at St. James Church, held by the city, and I talked to many of my neighbors that attend the meetings, and we all agree that our shopping centers need to be maintained to be vital to our neighborhoods. We realize that retail is also what we need in the area. Areas that are zoned for retail, and we do not need to lose any retail in Littleton. We need retail taxes to keep our city running. Since this was brought up at the last meeting, I will reiterate, I also wanted to comment that just because there is one 12-story tall building in the city of Littleton, and it happens to be on the west side of Santa Fe, does not mean that this is what the neighborhood wants to fill up the entire area. One 12-story building when 99% of the buildings are 1, 2, and 3-story buildings does not set a precedence for the Bellevue Corridor. Again, I will state that this property owner knew what the zoning was when they purchased the property. If they want the same zoning to somehow make it easier to scrape a building and build a new one, then zone it all B2. I have seen property owners, developers, come in front of Planning Commission and City Council over and over and get exactly what they want without any compromise. All the pictures are pretty, as always. No matter how you vote, let's hope the developer keeps his promise. Please use your powers to protect the neighbors and neighborhoods of Littleton from becoming downtown Denver. You have the power to protect the citizens in their neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Pam?
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here in District 1. First off, I want to repeat, as everyone has, thank you so much for voting last time to continue and get more information about this. And I love the comment of win-win-win. I hadn't gotten that far. That is exactly what I look to you to do. And we can do it. That I'm quite sure we can do it. So thank you for continuing this, and thanks to Rob for doing the work to come up with a correction for the FAR problem. I think that was a concern, and Hyde still is. I'm still wondering, though, what would be the process for the next step for combining the 2 sites, public or administrative? I'm still not sure about that. And obviously, I want it to be public, not administrative. So I want to understand that better. And I guess without the projection or something like that, it's very hard to see the references that would be the foundation of why that would be true. What is the as-built FAR for the 13-story River Point Senior Community at 5225 South Prince? As-built FAR, not the zoning of the ground it's on, because the Grove violates the zoning of the ground it's on. I want to know the as-built FAR for that 13-story building. I want to know what's the way forward for B3 and IP to the north. So it concerns me that we're talking about rezoning this property forever without understanding the impact on the residences across the street, as I mentioned last time, and the properties to the north. And no one else in the whole wide world has the responsibility to care about that except you folks and our staff. The citizens can't handle it. The staff has the knowledge and experience and expertise to consider those impacts and to describe them. And you have the charter to represent the city, to demand that we understand how does this rezoning not fit just the property, but how does it impact the city? Because this could be a taking from us. We're always so concerned about taking from the owners, but we're the people who have to live here, us and the people in the future. You are the folks who represent that. Also, I wonder, could there be more conditions? Thank you for bringing up open space. We could add that too. Or limiting height, or make it B2 and simply exclude residential. Exclude that B2 mixed use thing that was used to justify the Grove. There are some other alternatives here, and I wonder if we couldn't do more. And again, that would be driven by the surrounding properties. We would have rationale and reason to do that. So thank you, Planning Commission, for going as far as you have, and staff. I am grateful, and I think we have further to go. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Any other comments from staff?
Just one comment that we did receive an email, and that was printed and put in front of you. So just make sure you have that also as another public comment.
Any rebuttal from applicant? Thank you. I have one question for staff. The enforcement of the B3 condition of a 2-to-1 floor area ratio rather than a 1 or 3-to-1 floor area ratio, how's that administered? I could see it, the condition getting lost in the dust pile of the storage room, and 20 years from now it's forgotten. How is it administered?
Well, that is a fair statement relative to some of our existing files, but the awesome thing is moving forward, we actually have now GIS electronic zoning map, so we'll put the documentation in that, as well as we do have electronic files for each of the properties, so it will also be put in that.
So you bring it up and then it'll flag that, that 2-to-1 floor area ratio?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I guess I just follow up on Ms. Chadbourne's question about the, she asked about the FAR of the 12-story building. That wouldn't be an FAR, that would be a DU per acre, I believe, because it's residential. Do we have that information? Or?
That's correct. We did do some research and try to find what the FAR was. And through that research, we found that we weren't able to find the building permit or the, the hard records from what was developed. And the best answer we could provide were the number of dwelling units on the property. So we don't have a good answer for that.
Okay.
How many units per acre did it allow?
51 per acre, and a maximum of 250 units on that particular sub-area within the PD.
Okay, 51. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Certainly. I'll
Mr. Motion Seat here.
You're in the motion seat.
I move to approve Planning Commission Resolution 22-2018, approving the amendment to the official zoning map for the Bellevue Connection rezoning, which forwards a favorable recommendation to the City Council with no condition. And I'll ask for a second.
With no condition?
With no condition.
Do we have a second? Seeing none,
All right,
motion fails.
Repeat the same motion with a condition that the floor area ratio for this rezoning be set at 2-to-1 instead of 3-to-1.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Discussion. If you don't mind, we can go up and down the line or do it free for all. I'd prefer up and down the
No,
line.
I appreciate the applicant considering reducing the FAR to 2-to-1. That was kind of my biggest hang-up last time, and so I appreciate that. Thank you. And maybe last time I didn't extend my appreciation that you're considering to update and refresh that shopping center. I think that it's well overdue, so I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Great. I'd like to agree with Dan's comments about revitalization of this shopping center. It's long overdue, and it's going to be a big improvement to the corridor. Looking at land use comparison tables between B2 and B3, they're largely similar, and the B3 does allow a few additional uses. So by the rezoning, we are granting the project owner and applicant additional uses permitted by right. And I very much appreciate the willingness to limit the floor area ratio to the B2. And my biggest concern, though, is for the open storage. And I don't think that open storage is an appropriate use for this area. So I would like that to be an additional restriction, since we are giving additional uses to this rezoned area of 5.5 acres, that in addition to the 2-to-1 floor area ratio, we would request that the outdoor storage be restricted from the B3 rezone to be the same as the B2 area.
Get through all the comments, and then you could make your amendment. Okay.
Okay. I feel like the applicants have answered all of our questions primarily, and that it is a vast improvement over what's there now, and I look forward to seeing that as well. It also, as we mentioned last time, I think was in the presentation, it eliminates a B3 zoning, any possibility of housing going on that site, which I believe we heard from most that is not desirable. So I think that's a big benefit for the property. And the willingness for you to trade out the floor ratio, I think, is a win, at least a win-win, maybe not win-win-win, but maybe so. Anyway, so I'm in support of the applicant.
So I'll talk a little bit about why I made the motion the way I did originally. I have concerns about creating a quasi-planned unit development through conditions on a standard zone district. One of the purposes of a standard zone district is that both the applicants and the community know what to expect when something is zoned a certain way. And the concern about floor area ratio, in my opinion, is somewhat overblown due to my experience in working with site plans. I've worked with scores of them over the years, and it's highly unlikely that this would approach anything close to a 3-to-1 floor area ratio without underground parking and significantly changed economic factors. And by the time we were there, we would likely have a new zoning code. So that's why I initially made the motion without any conditions. The other thing I'm worried about with adding conditions to standard zoning is that, are we letting the door open a little bit to other changes to our standard zoning districts from the dais? I heard a desire for open space or perhaps adjusting the uses. I agree that outdoor storage is not a terribly desirable use. It tends to be unattractive if not properly screened. However, the zone district does allow it, and my concern is that by making this a conditional standard rezone, that we're sort of opening the door for all sorts of quasi-planned unit developments. If the desire was to negotiate the zoning, this should have been a planned development overlay. So, however, I will support the main motion.
Good comments. Robin?
I agree with the comments, as diverse as they are. Appreciate lowering the FAR to 2 to 1. I appreciate the idea of putting another condition on keeping the storage out for the same reasons as we've heard. And I appreciate Jason's comments concerning, are we opening the door? And Steve or Jocelyn, could you make a comment on that?
Can you restate that? I'm sorry.
Of course. So Jason's concern was as we're opening up the door by putting conditions on a standard zoning. And it is a very unusual request.
No, I think each zoning case stands on its own merits. So the question is that this commission, in the exercise of its quasi-judicial authority, doesn't feel that the public health, safety, and welfare warrants recommending this condition. My only concern is that when you start conditioning out uses, that again becomes a little bit of an interpretation issue for staff, because right now in this code, our use chart doesn't necessarily match its definition. So, but it's well within the fact that you do it in this case does not mean that you're going to do it in any other cases.
Thanks, Steve. So I would support the amendment about adding that and support this as a, support the motion.
Go ahead.
Hey, first I'd like to thank Rob for doing a good job of answering our questions from the last session, and for the good community input, which I believe helped kind of steer us toward a good solution. The concerns I've heard, in addition to the floor area ratio, were height and open space percentages, and I also agree with Jason's assertion that you don't want to complicate or muddy too much the basic zoning, and so for that reason I would not want to add any conditions regarding that. Even the outdoor storage, I think, also tends to muddy it. I would support the motion the way it's on the table, and really encourage the landowner developer to go ahead with the plans that he's laid out before us, because I think it's appropriate and it's needed. Even though he could turn around and sell the property tomorrow, the zoning enables whomever to do some good things here. I don't think that the market's going to allow for a 12-story building to be built there. So that's it.
Well, I too appreciate the condition of placing 2 to 1 floor area ratio on the B3, even though it does a little muddying. But quite frankly, it doesn't really matter. B3 prohibits residential. There's also, you'd have to be, in my mind, a complete idiot as a developer if you wanted to put a high-rise office building on this very small site. Those are the only two uses that I could see that might even come remotely close to a 2 to 1 floor area ratio. Parking requirements, somebody else mentioned, is a large break on any kind of mass building on this site. We can judge that by the floor area ratios of projects in and around this particular site. Anything we can do to help this developer to refurbish, rebuild, add space to this site is welcome. It's good for Littleton, it's good for the developer, it's good for everyone. Let's see. Also, they're planning on rebuilding the portion of the west site that was destroyed by fire. Again, adding more retail is a good thing. To my mind, unlimited heights is not a concern. Again, it's the parking that will dictate. Any kind of high-rise would require below-grade parking or a parking garage. That's preposterous on a site of this size. Last, there was a comment by the public about this being a possible multi-level retail site. Quite frankly, multi-retail will not work here. Small site. Last time I saw a multi-level retail establishment was on South Broadway near Hamden. That project with, I think Kaufman's men's store was there. That project lasted about 15 years. It was two-level. It was torn down after about 15 years. It absolutely did not work. This is going to be a single-level retail strip. Therefore, I will support the motion. John, do you want to make your amendment?
Yes, I would like to make an amendment that the addition to restricting the B3 to a floor area ratio of 2 to 1.
Can you speak into the microphone a little bit so everybody can hear?
I'd like to add an additional condition that the outdoor storage, mini warehousing as a use by right be excluded from the B3 general business zoning on the subject 5.05 acre property.
Second.
We have an amendment. We have a second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, we'll vote on the amendment. Steve, you want to?
No, that
jump
was
in?
what I wanted to make sure was that everyone understands you're voting on the amendment, and based on that, then you'll come back to the motion either as amended or in its current state.
Yes. Okay. Vote on the amendment.
All right, the vote on the amendment fails.
Okay. Back to the main motion. We've had our discussion. Any other comment? Time to vote.
And the main motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Thank you, and good luck with your redevelopment. Next item, PC Resolution 24-2018, a resolution to amend Title 10 of the Zoning Code, Section 1017-4, regarding sign code definitions, and Section 1017-6-2 to add definitions for human signs and rotating signs. We have a double staff presentation.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is asking for the commission to recommend to the City Council the approval of a text amendment to Title 10 of the Zoning Code. As you'll recall, previously, we had moved the sign code from the building code into the zoning code. And so now that it's in the zoning code, amendments come to this commission just like any other amendment to the zoning code. When the council enacted the original ordinance on the sign code, the council left a couple of issues open. And the first issue that the council left open was that the council said we need to look at this issue of mascots, human signs, and look at how the city approaches that. The second was to look at the issue of rotating signs. Now, rotating signs are a sign generally on a pedestal where the sign on top of the pedestal rotates. Based on that, we looked at a number of zoning codes, Greenlee, Lakewood, for examples. And codes generally don't separate out human signs and commercial mascots. They generally have a single definition for human signs. And frankly, if you look at the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Reed versus Town of Gilbert, that's exactly what it recommended, was that you don't look at the content. From the staff standpoint, a human sign, whether it's a gorilla or a Statue of Liberty, matters nothing. Our concern is whether, for example, in the public right-of-way, it obstructs the sidewalk, or in private property, does it interfere with the access and egress from the property. So the recommendation is, in this amendment, we added a definition for human signs, and we simply defined them as both people as well as mascots, and treat them all the same. The second is the issue of rotating signs. When this went to the council looked at this and said, we don't feel an absolute prohibition of rotating signs is the direction we'd like to recommend to the commission. What we have done here is we have crafted a definition for rotating signs. Rotating signs will have to have a permit. They will be part of the development sign package, and they will be limited to no higher than 2 feet in height. Realistically, I don't think you're going to see a lot of rotating signs with those standards. But conceivably, there could be a development that might use a rotating sign. And so we have added that those standards for the rotating signs. And it's certainly our recommendation. This has been a cooperative project between the Community Development Department and the City Attorney's Office, and both entities are asking and recommend to the Commission that you adopt this resolution forwarding this text amendment onto the City Council. And with that, Jocelyn and I are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions for staff? Go ahead.
Certainly. So by definition, a human sign is a sign that is advertising a business commodity, service, or product. So if I were carrying a sign around that says need $9 for light rail, that is not advertising a business or commodity.
That's correct. The United States Supreme Court, the Ninth Circuit, the 10th Circuit, and most of the federal courts have all held that panhandling and solicitation for money, even with a sign, is constitutionally protected and cannot be regulated.
And then the regulations for human signs, it would require an annual permit, and that's to utilize the right-of-way as well as private property.
That would be to only utilize private property. Again, the right-of-way is considered a public forum where you are able to be a human sign. However, it's also what we call an ADA accessible facility, Americans with Disabilities Act. And so therefore, if a sign, human sign that is interfering with individuals' access to the sidewalk, they could be asked to remove themselves from the sidewalk so that persons with disabilities are able to use the sidewalk as an ADA facility.
Thank you.
Other questions? Great.
Do the size limits apply to those that are human signs that are in the right-of-way, or just the ones that are permitted in the private property?
The limits would apply to those in the right-of-way. They could be, the sign that they could hold could be no more than 2 by 4. Now, conceivably, a panhandler could hold a larger sign, but realistically, it would become a traffic obstruction, and we would deal with it through the traffic code, not through the sign code.
Anyone on this side? Not seeing a lot of questions. Robin, you okay?
Thank you.
Well, one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Under the guise of too much time on my hands, I was thinking of ways of getting around this. Train chimpanzees and robots 20 years from now, how would they be administered or controlled?
Well, in terms of and I'll let Jocelyn in this, in terms of a robot would not, because it's not a human sign, we would treat that just as a sign under our sign code. Now, I think the day will, as much as sign codes from a city attorney's standpoint, you always hope that you never have to address the sign code more than once. However, I expect that we'll be pretty much every couple years addressing the sign codes. The world of signs is changing. 20 years ago, electronic reader board signs were considered highly unusual. Now you see them everywhere. Old-style neon signs are beginning to go away. So I expect as this technology changes and we have robots roaming around, and we may have drone-held signs. And we'll just have to be addressing these as circumstances occur.
One last other possibility. I own a chicken outlet, and so I have a guy in a chicken suit, but he also has a cow and a sign. How is that? How is that is livestock allowed in Littleton?
There is a well-known chain that serves chicken that actually uses a cow, an inflatable cow, as a sign, and that would be, we would treat that as a sign. That's not a human sign. That's just an inflatable sign. Now, I suppose if they have someone dressed up as a cow, we would now treat that as a human sign.
I'm talking about a real cow.
Oh, if they bring in a real cow, then I suppose if they bring in a real cow and put a placard on it, we would treat that as a sign. But generally, I don't think in those zones, livestock is permitted. So we would simply deal with it as a livestock issue.
So fine, deal with it when we come to it. Thank you.
And however, I would tell you there are states that are actually beginning to legalize livestock in their urban areas, so who knows?
Any other questions for staff?
I've got one question. If I heard correctly or understood correctly, the rotating sign is not necessarily going to be prohibited, but in the draft ordinance on line 47, that's under signs prohibited, it says the following signs shall not be permitted in any zone district, and it has rotating signs. And 2 lines later, 49, it says portable signs except as specifically permitted. So my question is, should there be except as specially permitted on line 47 after rotating signs?
Which page are you on? I'm sorry.
Page 1 of 4 of the draft ordinance.
It's page 1, okay.
Page 1 of 4, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good clarification, and I think what we were intending to put there was temporary rotating signs, because the proposal is not to allow every type of rotating signs. It's only for permanent signage and only in that certain size. So I think the pieces that is crossed out, that should actually say temporary, because we do not allow, the amendment is not allowing for temporary signage to be rotating.
Okay, that would clear it up.
So line 47 should read temporary rotating signs?
Yes, I would ask that if a motion is made, that the motion indicate that it be recommended to the council with line 47 on page 1, adding the word temporary before rotating signs.
Good catch, John. Okay. Temporary. Any other questions for staff? Okay, we'll open up to public comment. Again, you'll have 3 minutes to speak, et cetera, et cetera. Yellow card when there's 30 seconds left, red card when there's no time left. Do we have a sign-up sheet? Nobody, okay. Does anybody wish to speak on this topic? Pam? Thanks.
Planning Commission, my name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here. I have to admit, I haven't really studied this. I have listened to the sessions, and what I heard was a couple city council members very emphatically wanting to support businesses. Now, by giving them more ways to show signs to people. You know, originally it started with the downtown merchants wanting A-frame sandwich sides on the sidewalks. So this has come a long way from that. I thought that communities could choose whether they wanted to have very catchy, movement-oriented things happening on their sidewalks or property near roads, because it's a distraction, it's a safety issue, and it's also a quality of community issue. I don't understand how that intersects with the court rulings for content. I think we can still exclude the kind of where on Bellevue, where the blow-up thing goes up and down, that's in Englewood, not Littleton. And I would prefer a community where there's not human people standing twirling signs or something, because I think the businesses will do fine without it. I don't think it hurts businesses to not have these signs. So that's my concern, but I don't understand the way the court cases go with the way that communities used to be able to regulate that. So anyway, just wanted to say it because I think Littleton has that history. We have that character. We wanted it to be that way. We have a beautiful Littleton Boulevard and Main Street, and it's not really about that. It's not the character of our community, so thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment. Motion?
I'll go ahead and make it. I move to approve PC Resolution 24-2018, amending Title 10 of the Zoning Code, Section 10-17-4 regarding sign code definitions, and Section 10-17-6-2 to add definitions for human signs and rotating signs, which forwards a favorable recommendation to City Council.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Did that include the temporary on line 47?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should amend it
Oh,
for the
yes, I'm
temporary
sorry.
sign, yes.
Yeah.
Should
Yeah,
I-
page, let's see, page 1, line 47, add the word temporary. Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah. Do I need to say that? I would like to amend it to include
Well, it's not
page
amended,
1,
it'll be,
47.
you amended your main motion. Okay.
All right, let me start over
Let's
again.
start again. Make Steve happy.
I move to approve PC Resolution 24-2018, amending Title 10 of the Zoning Code, Section 10-17-4 regarding sign code definitions, and Section 10-17-6-2 to add definitions for human signs and rotating signs, which forwards a favorable recommendation to City Council with the following condition: change at line 47 on page 1 of the draft ordinance to include temporary rotating signs.
Good. We have a motion now. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. A discussion?
I would just like to say I'm in support of this and address the concern about how, why these are necessary. It's my understanding that these types of signs, the human signs and the rotating signs, are something that have evolved over time. Human sign seems to have caught on in the last 5-10 years, something that businesses are doing to attract customers. Whether it works or not, I don't know. But there's not currently, I understand, an adequate means to regulate those, as well as the rotating signs, which is more or less a new technology. So that's why I think that we just need to have the means to regulate those.
Any other comment? Seeing none, cast your vote.
Right, motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Next up is comments, reports from staff.
One comment, just to let you guys know, the Envision Littleton survey closed last Monday, and we had 852 survey responses, so
Wow.
pretty excited about that. And Kending Keast is now working on a draft vision statement, or plan, rather, and they'll have that for us to look at at early October. We have a study session with them coming up in October, just FYI.
Good. Any commissioner comments?
No?
None. Well, we are going to adjourn to the community room for our study session. Thank you. We'll take a 7-minute break here. The topic is ID number 18-302, amendments regarding short-term rentals to Title 10 of the zoning code. You've got your attachment, you've all looked at them. Staff is the applicant, so fire away.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, brief note about how we got here. In the current zoning code, we have a series of definitions on rooming houses, tourist homes, rooming and boarding houses. Quite candidly, the definitions contradict each other. And not only that, but you can read them to include all sorts of things that maybe or maybe were not intended. If you go back to the Clarion assessment of our zoning code, one of the first things that they said the city should do is to have its definitions actually match its use chart. This is a classic example of taking that advice to heart. We basically are going to propose, and this came out of a short-term rental, where we suddenly recognized our definitions don't fit. So, as a result, we're addressing the short-term rental issue, but we're also addressing some of our other definitions. If you read our code right now, you could do an extended stay hotel in the R3X zone. I don't think that was ever the intent, but that's the way our code works. So A, we're proposing to go in and address several of our definitions so that they actually fit. And then we're going to address our land use chart and take the actual definitions and insert them into the land use chart, and so that the definitions in the chart match. Now you're going to see that some of the items in the land use chart are in teal, which indicates that they are new. Why is that? Because some of these definitions we didn't have before. And rather than trying to sort of say, well, this was over here and this was over here, we'd rather just be right up front and say, these are new. For example, the classic problem in this whole area. Middleton does not have a definition for a bed and breakfast. I don't know what zone you put it in. We have no definition, and we have no reference to it on the land use chart. Fortunately, no one has come in, and I haven't gotten this call from Jocelyn saying, where do we put it? But there's no reason not to address that. So as a result, the short-term rental issue really brought that to the fore. And so when you look at the ordinance, we really had three objectives. One was to create a formalized process, maintain community character, and ensure public safety. So how do we accomplish those objectives in terms of this code? First, by having an annual permitting process. One of the problems in Littleton has been that we give you a business license forever, and there's really no effective means to revoke it. This is the only city I'm aware of that does that. Every other city, you get an annual business license. It has to be renewed, and it could even be revoked if you haven't met the requirements of the code. And we are proposing, starting with short-term rentals, to move towards an annual business license process. Secondly, there will be an annual short-term rental operator's license, where there will be standards that if you fail to comply with those standards, your license will not be renewed. And currently, the code recognizes that current licensees must be compliant by January 1 of 2020. Why is that? We have 9 licensees who have followed the rules. They did get a business license, and we recognize that they should have some degree of time to get into compliance with the licensing provisions. So 2, how do we maintain community character? These will be allowed in all zoning districts that have a residential use, but there can only be 1 license per person issued. So I could not come into Littleton and say, oh, I'm going to get in the bed and breakfast, I'm going to get in the short-term rental business and have 25 licenses and have 25 homes. 1 license per person. You must meet the building code occupancy limits, and this is one area that I think we're going to want to address a bit more. if you look at the building code requires 150 square foot per person in a residential occupancy. Many cities, a good example is Lakewood, require somewhere between 300 and 500 square feet per person in their definition as a family. The concern would be if you just go by the building code definition, you could have a 1,500 square foot house and have 10 unrelated people. We are going to be recommending that we added a definition of family into our code and that we establish a minimum of 300 square feet per person. So a 1,500 square foot house could only have 5 unrelated people. You might say, well, don't we have a current definition of family? Yes, we do. We can't enforce it because it violates the Federal Fair Housing Act. And this has been one of our projects to fix, but we've had some other projects we've needed to deal with first. But now that we're here, it's clear to us we need to change that definition of family. You also will have to meet the other building code requirements, and you must provide parking for the renters. Now, one of the big concerns we have on parking is this cuts both ways. If I say, well, you have a short-term rental and you have 5 people renting it and they have 3 cars, but the driveway only handles 2, where's that other car going to go? On the street. Well, if we say you have to have it on your lot, then people tend to pave over their yard. Do we really want people putting more asphalt in their yard versus on the street? One way some cities have dealt with this has been to say, okay, you have a short-term rental. You are limited to no more than, say, 2 cars above that and beyond the owners. So if the owner has 2, the renters can have 2, but no more. That will be something else we're going to look at. Our concern is we don't want to put extra parking on the streets, but we also don't want people paving over their front yards. So
and you compare that to a family with 3 teenagers, and all 3 teenagers have a car. They're up to 5 cars. And compare that. Yeah.
Yes, and I grew up in a family like that, and there were 3 of us who all had cars, and my parents had 2, and we had 5 cars and a 2-car driveway, and yes, they paved over part of the yard, and we were parking on the street, and that's going to happen. That's common. The question is with a short-term rental, do you want to increase that problem? And that's a value. I mean, that's really a value judgment, but it's an issue that's out there. And then finally, how do we ensure public safety? One, the owner will have to provide that their renters receive copies of all of the city's noise, parking, and trash regulations. And 2, they must have a local contact. One of the concerns that you have with these across jurisdictions is, okay, I have a short-term rental in Littleton, but I live in Phoenix. It's going to be really hard to get a response. We want a local contact. And that is a necessity. This particular ordinance is very much modeled on Golden. One of the areas that Golden addressed that the council did not address in the same way was whether the owner of the short-term rental has to have that rental as their primary residence. There are some jurisdictions that do that. There are others that don't. There are others that take a different approach, which is to say that I can have a short-term rental in Littleton, but I must be a Littleton resident. It may not be the house I'm living in, but I have to be a Littleton resident. Some have said, well, you can only have a single license for a short-term rental, and we don't really look at where you reside. We just look at the number of licenses. Now, we estimate that there's been all sorts of numbers bantered about. We estimate that most likely there's somewhere probably around 100 to 200 short-term rentals in this community. That's just an estimate based on looking at what other communities have and what we would expect.
Do I think there's more? Probably not. Do I think there's probably less? Could well be. One of the hopes with licensing scheme is that we get a better handle on this. Now, one of the other things that is done as well, and I would expect we will recommend to the City Council, there are a number of firms that do the initial enforcement, investigation, and registration for you. A good example is a company called Host Compliance, which actually does Denver's. They are very, very inexpensive, and it would be our plan that should this go ahead and council approve this, that we will contract with a firm like that to do the initial inquiry and management of this. This will allow us to more effectively manage this area, and then if there is a violation, our code enforcement staff will deal with it. Finally, I do expect that we will be back here within a year to talk to you again. You say, why would that be? You look at Golden, you look at Denver, you look at Greeley, you look at virtually every city that does this. They find that they need to come back and fine-tune their regulations. They just find that certain things they did maybe didn't work very well, other things they did, they realized, well, we didn't do quite enough there, so I do expect we will be back to fine-tune this. This, for us in Littleton, this is the first attempt that we've done to deal with short-term rentals. And we, through the ordinance writing and drafting process, have learned a lot, but I think we will be back. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jocelyn, and let Jocelyn...
We just have one quick overview of the next steps, and then turn it back over to the commission and your comments. That's okay. So right now, based on the moratorium, as you guys know, was adopted by City Council, we have till basically the middle of October to bring forward an ordinance. So within that time frame, it's kind of compressed. So in addition to the study session this evening, we do have the draft already posted on Littleton Plans for public comment as well. Because as you know, that's also part of the structure, right, when we do code updates. And so that is out for public comment until September 18th. Ordinance does come formally before you after that on the 24th of September. Then your recommendation moves forward onto City Council. And the first and second reading before Council is the 2nd of October, and then the final decision on October 16th. So just letting you know that's the timing. And with that, that's all we have for our presentation, and more turn it back over to the commission and however you want to manage comments.
Let's start with some general comments, and maybe we can slog through page by page the portions that deal with vacation rentals. Anybody want to start? Robin, I know you're chomping at the bit.
Just a general comment in, when I was reading through this, you look at the bed and breakfast, it needs to be owner occupied. It looked like with the boarding, remember not, it did not need to be owner occupied. Now we're saying the short-term renter is not owner occupied. I'm just looking for more of the rhyme and reason about why what's decided to say, yes, you have to have it like a bed and breakfast, or no, you don't have to have it like a short-term.
Commissioner, members of the commission, when we looked at this, we looked at a number of definitions across jurisdictions. And what we found was that generally bed and breakfasts do have an owner-occupied requirement. Do you have to? No, you could certainly take that out. It's just that in draft, in looking at our definitions, because we lack them, we looked at a number of jurisdictions, and that's what we found. But certainly I have stayed in bed and breakfast, which were not owner-occupied. So I think that's entirely just a decision for the commission to recommend to the council. You could go either way.
And, well, I'll wait till we go through page by page if that's what you said we're going to be doing later.
Fire away, anyone?
So should there be a definition in here of short-term rental?
Yes.
Is it defined in here? Is it in the, I guess that's the overall draft ordinance.
And
it's on page 3.
That's on page 3 of the definition.
Okay.
And what we again attempted to look at was other jurisdictions, and this gets into some of a little bit of a technical detail because rentals of more than 31 consecutive days or more are treated differently under the sales tax code than rentals of 31 days or less. So part of it is we are trying to have this mesh the tax code.
Page 1 of the staff communication, second paragraph in background, talks about the rights of a tenant. I'm just curious, what are the rights of a tenant versus someone who rents a hotel or motel room?
This gets into a very interesting legal term called the right of quiet enjoyment. And we could go back to 14th century English law and talk about it. Oh,
Adjourned.
If you ever decide you need to, call me up and we'll go out for a beer and talk about it. That being the case, what it means is when you are a tenant in a occupancy, you have certain rights, which we call quiet enjoyment, and this means you have a right to basically have control of those premises subject to the rights of the landlord. For example, a landlord cannot just barge into a tenant's apartment and start searching the drawers. A landlord cannot just walk into a tenant's apartment and remove the property. Hotel in a motel room is what we call a bailment, which is another fancy legal term. What it basically means is you are given a very limited right of possession of this room subject to the owner's control. Unlike an apartment, the housekeeper opens up your door and comes in. And if the housekeeper notices conditions that are contrary to the hotel's rooms, the hotel's manager has the right to tell you to leave. And so you don't have that right of quiet enjoyment. And that is also the case with the short-term rental. With the short-term rental, is it a motel or is it a tenancy? It's kind of a combination of both, but generally it's treated as a more like a hotel under the sales tax code. One of the problems in our definitions is if you look at some of our definitions, they mixed in tenancies and bailments all in one definition, which created no end of problems. And so did I hopefully answer that question?
There's mine.
All right, you want the full 14th century
Old English.
It's been flying around that whether it has to be your primary residence or whether it could just be non-primary residence. You obviously in this form have gone for the primary residence. You have to live there, or you have to be a tenant that has approval of the owner to allow it. Reason for that versus just anybody. I assume you're trying to. That would be page 6 of your proposed ordinance.
Yes. When we discussed this with the council, the council wanted to take a little bit different approach than the primary residence. What they said is, we want the owner who's renting this out to be the fee owner. We don't want corporations or businesses or lessees. We want only the fee owner. And then we want to limit that fee owner to only one short-term rental within the city. Versus, one of the concerns about primary residence is how do we monitor that? My primary residence may be in Littleton from July to September because Phoenix is very hot. My primary residence may be in Phoenix from December to March because I can't stand snow. My primary residence may be in California in the spring. And it was just one of these things, the council and I looked at this and said, maybe there's a better approach in trying to figure out primary residence let's limit the number of licenses to owners, let's limit the number of licenses to overall versus the whole primary residence. But there's lots of cities that do primary residence. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's really just difference in approaches.
In this case, we have a primary residence. That's your proposal here.
It was in the original proposal, and then council said, we'd like you to look at it differently. And so that's why you see it in the original proposal. And then on page 6, it's add a new section 10-4-18. And that's the revisions where council said, we want to look at a different approach.
Is that on page 6? I'm sorry, what page?
On page 6, yes.
Yeah, number 3 has strike through
Number
where it
2
talks
and
about
number 3.
primary residence.
Okay.
So number 2, they can be the fee owner or the primary resident. So then either one.
Okay.
I have a question. What's the difference between primary resident and owner occupied?
Well, owner occupied, it means that the owner resides there. That primary residence basically means it's where you are for the moment, but you don't necessarily, you're not committed to be staying there. And so they're very similar, but the difference is that conceivably you could have a primary residence and not be the owner. You could be live in an apartment and have a primary residence.
A question about some municipalities that are more up in the mountains, more vacation spots.
Yes.
For instance, Durango, where my daughter lives, their fees are astronomical, $750. Ours is $25, I think, is proposed here. But they don't make any designation of an entire house versus a single small room without, with just a bathroom and maybe a hot plate or a microwave. Is there anything in here or that should be included to take care of that situation? Or to you, it's all short-term rentals, period?
Doesn't matter the size.
This is all short-term rentals, period. It doesn't matter. As for the fees, the city is currently doing a cost of service study. We didn't want to presume that, we didn't want to set the fees so high that we couldn't justify them. And plus, with this study going on, what we looked at was an initial fee, and as the city finishes this study, we can then, and basically what they do in this study is they actually look at how much each type of license and permit takes in terms of time, effort, and work by the city, and what's the real cost. So we started out here realizing that the cost may be too low. We don't think it's too high, but we recognize that may need to be adjusted.
And we currently don't have any fee for a business license for any other category of business in Littleton, so it didn't seem appropriate to make it higher than 20 to start with on that fee as well.
I have experience with short-term rentals in 2 different states, and Montana, my fee is for the license is $40, and then in California, I believe it's similar, and it's a great benefit for a property owner to be able to do the short-term rentals, and it's kind of a new thing with the development of the internet and websites that make that process of doing short-term rentals very convenient for property owners. And you mentioned a couple of them in your proposed amendment. The one thing that I do personally is I limit the minimum number of nights to 4. And the reason why is I think that's where communities have problems with short-term rentals, is you get a property owner who just wants to maximize turn on their property, and then the immediate neighbors are getting constant cars in and out every day. And I think that's something that has caused some adjacent property owners to really get super upset as a change in their neighborhood. Does that mean you shouldn't do it? But I think the minimum number of nights thing is what I personally do, just to be a good property owner to the owners that are adjacent to the properties I own. But I just wanted to throw that out there as something the community could do. So I'm just wondering, how would you put that into something like this? Maybe areas that have an HOA, if the HOA for that particular group of housing units decides that they want to put some type of minimum night restriction on it to avoid that constant turn of a super popular property. That is just one idea.
And the HOA could certainly do that independently of any action by the city. They could certainly amend their codes, covenants, and restrictions and do that. And Commissioner, you're correct. I've seen this both ways. I've seen some cities that will have a minimum number of nights requirement. Some other cities will also have a maximum number of nights you can rent a short-term rental. Some of the mountain communities, for example, only allow 60 nights of rental in a calendar year. One of the concerns we also are trying to deal with here is making sure what we do is within our available resources to enforce. We didn't want to create a situation where we have an extensive amount of monitoring and not the resources to actually do it, because I think one of the worst things is to pass something like this. People expect you're then going to enforce it, and then you don't enforce it.
We don't have the resources.
Because we don't have the resources. So this was also, quite honestly, that was one of the things that we considered was what are the things we can do to better protect public safety and fit within our available resources that we are able to enforce.
So as it's written right now, the HOA could make a more restrictive implementation. They could ban it altogether.
They could. An HOA could simply change their codes, covenants, and restrictions to ban short-term rentals. Now, the city would not enforce that. The HOA would enforce it.
And then those areas that have no HOA, then there's not much remedy for adjacent landowners.
For number at the moment, for number of nights, right, is what you're saying? There's other requirements in here that you still have to meet.
Is there any risk to the city if somebody has to get a license and, I don't know, with ADA or fair housing, if they decide to stay at a place, oh, it's not handicap accessible, and I feel like I want to sue that person for whatever reason, is there any risk that it would come back to the city at all? Or are we indemnified, or how does...
No, I mean, I don't believe you could successfully sue the city if you were a tenant in a short-term rental, because the city's obligation is not to you, it's to the general public. And this is what we call, and this we would have governmental immunity for under the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act. So I don't see a risk to the city. The only time I would ever see a risk here would be if the city was to engage in discriminatory acts itself. Then that could be a problem, but we certainly would not do that.
A few comments. The notification, apparently you have to notify the people that are short-term rental people. Could there be a clause in there that, each year you notify your neighbors of what the rules are in Littleton, so that if there's a complaint, they can look at their little 2-page pamphlet and call it into there's a phone number to call into the city.
That would be, kind of how we do things right now. Let's just take weeds, for example, right? We have an educational outreach to the community about various code items, so it would be similar, like the city would probably do some education around short-term rentals and what the rules are, whether it's online or, using that company to help us assist us.
I'm talking about just a direct notification.
So direct notification of the people that are
Of
adjacent
your neighbors,
to
so say, guy behind you, either side, and across the street, and keep it simple, but it just seems to me to...
when they would be issued a license?
What's that? Yes. Second thing is, if we want compliance, KISS it, keep it simple, stupid. The rate, a question about the rate in that might not cover this company that you're talking about that would enforce the compliance. I doubt it. Yes. So that 25 would probably have to go up, but $750 like in Durango is preposterous. I mean, let's see. I'm leaning towards wanting, and if I could put my hat on speaking for Littleton Heights, I would say the majority of Littleton Heights, sight unseen, going to the website, Littleton Heights would prefer to have owner-occupied in order to have a short-term rental. In that, if the owner is there, they can, there's somebody right there that the neighbors could complain to. If somebody's occupying the place that owns the place, they're definitely going to take care of the place better than if it's, some guy in Poughkeepsie, New York. So that would, I'm surprised that was changed to just one per applicant.
You want to go through the page by page?
Yes.
Just keep it moving here.
I'll start with page 1 of 9 here. Anybody have any comments on the first page? Sherry?
No comments if I can open this back up. So on the first page, I was looking at that, the rooming board house is, paragraph is got struck. But then it's moved over to the next page for rooming boarding house. And it looks like it was defined later, but then when I look, it looks like those categories have been totally eliminated. So we're calling those then bed and breakfast now? Am I seeing that correctly?
I think the only category that we eliminated was, we had a category called tourist homes, which we eliminated because, quite frankly, it made no sense. And then what we did was the rooming facility and the rooming boarding house in the current code was somewhat contradictory, so we basically proposed to remove all those definitions and start over with new definitions. So we ended up with bed and breakfast, hotel, motel, then we ended up with a rooming facility, which tends to be more of, the traditional example years ago was the YMCA, where they actually rented rooms. They may have had communal cooking or restroom facilities, but they were generally much more like a landlord-tenant versus and then what we did is that many times people will have rooming boarding houses where you don't have, like colleges, where you rent a room, you don't have cooking or room facilities, but you may have your room, the owner of the house might do your laundry or provide your linen, and so we tried to separate those two and then add in a new definition of short-term rental. So, because short-term rental currently in the code doesn't fit anywhere, much like bed and breakfast.
I was really trying to further define those terms. That's why it was crossed out on the existing definition.
Okay,
Further clarified and specified.
I didn't see a definition for sorority and fraternity houses. Did I miss that, or should there be one just because for consistency?
Definition for. Oh, no, we don't actually have a definition for sorority and fraternity houses in the code. We probably actually, with a college here in town, we ought to probably add that in.
Do you have any sororities or
I
fraternities?
don't know if there's any for ACC or not.
So.
I think so.
But there might, and I don't know whether the seminary would have any. I know some religious seminaries do have like sororities or fraternities, but we, at this point, we don't have a definition for that.
So if ACC expands, and why not?
Well, I think
Sorority Row there.
They are getting 4-year degrees in some areas.
I think we ought to probably just, out of an abundance of caution,
define it.
Let's define it.
Since it isn't allowed.
I think Klein was right in recommending what they did, so let's just go define it. Now's a great time.
Any other questions? Page 2.
Page 2.
Sure. Can I just fill one thing on page 1? The last, the bullet H there, guests shall at all times be prohibited from using a hotel room or suite as primary permanent residence. I know some cities allow that, and that may just be carried over. Is that something that we need to include there?
The tax issue.
Well, and what he says, that these are characterized by having some of the following amenities. Technically, under the sales tax code, if you actually allowed a person to rent a hotel room and make it into their permanent residence, it would change how it's treated. But from our standpoint, what we wanted to avoid was, there's a well-known facility in this community right up the street where people live there on a regular basis, and we didn't want them, or similar type uses, to say, well, we're a hotel, we should fall into the hotel category versus some other category. One of the things that we have seen elsewhere has been many places have converted old motels or old hotels into everything from residential treatment centers to halfway houses, but we don't want those types of facilities saying, well, we're a motel. No, you're not. You're something else, and we need to regulate you as something else.
I guess in my thinking, I was distinguishing motel from hotel, but I guess it could, and I guess they could be categorized together. So I understand where that's going.
I had a question about including a definition for both hotel and motel. I mean, motel, you're thinking motor court versus hotel has a centralized lobby. Is that a useful distinction to have in our zoning code because they're allowed in the same zone districts?
Generally, those distinctions you will find them in the more modern zoning codes. One of the reasons is that some cities have begun to move towards saying motels we maybe will allow along a freeway or expressway, but hotels we want to be more in downtown convention areas. I think the distinction is something worth keeping and having because they are somewhat different, and otherwise what I think you could end up with is with a single definition. You could end up with these facilities being at a lower quality than what you would otherwise have.
But if we don't have design standards that differentiate or require certain things, it's a distinction without difference perhaps, but...
And I think you probably are right in that long term, there are things in this code as we go through the visioning process and the comp plan process. A good example will be someday I expect this city will have commercial design review. And that will change a number of things in the zoning code. We're not there yet, but I expect we will get there.
Generally, Jason, I think we've been of the mind of right now at least, and you're right, once we get through the comp plan and then code updates or zoning code like in wholeness, then maybe that'll change it. But generally, I think we've been working on adding, cleaning up the existing code and adding more detail to the definition. It's certainly not going to hurt to do that.
Yeah,
and I think that's just been kind of some of the direction, just based on the rest of our code and how things work. But recognizing that, once we do comp plan and actually get into the whole code, we can certainly make changes again.
And you can tell a difference. I mean, a motel is different from a hotel in the definition. Yeah.
Anything else on page 2? Page 3, I had one comment about rooming boarding houses without cooking and/or restroom facilities. That's rather interesting. You could have a boarding house with you get a bed and a cot in a corner and forget the bathroom.
Well, usually, I think the meaning of that would be that there's communal restroom facilities, but you would not have a restroom facility that would be.
Maybe add a little section.
Like designated.
Up the mountains in tin cup, you
Like
just
we
go
don't
out
have
in the
to have
woods.
a
We will make sure that's understood. That's not individual restroom facilities. The restroom facilities would be communal.
Thank you. That's was a little odd.
Refreshing. Better.
I had a question whether we do need to keep the distinction between the rooming facility and the rooming boarding house. Their definitions are so close. Could they be combined into one category, or is it important to keep them distinguished from each other?
You could add them into one. I think the reason we kept them separate is that the one does generally have the room does have individual restroom facilities where the other doesn't. And so but I mean, if you combine them, what we found is in looking at most codes, they did make a distinction between ones that had communal facilities and ones that had individual facilities.
I think how it would be important in terms of application or enforcement, but
how we would enforce that would be that we would basically, if we had a complaint, this is our enforcement's on a complaint basis. And the biggest difference is the rooming facility would be allowed in some of the multifamily districts where the rooming boarding house is allowed pretty much as a principal use or conditional use in all of our residential districts.
So I don't really see that this definition says that a rooming facility has its own restroom, or whichever one. I don't see that clearly in either.
It says a rooming facility is a single structure and with communal cooking and restroom facilities. It's clearly in, but what we can do is we can clarify the difference between the two, and we'll make that clarification.
I have a question on page 3, paragraph 4, where it's introducing the short-term rental definition. And then part A below that says the rental is marketed through third-party. Examples are, and you mentioned Airbnb, TripAdvisor. I think as long as you're going to be mentioning specific sites or businesses that do that, you should mention probably the most popular short-term rental business in the U.S. is called Vacation Rental by Owner.
We can certainly add them in. The idea that we were getting at is that that's one of the ways. Sometimes people would say, well, I'm just inviting my family over to stay with me for 30 days, and I'm not a rental. But then when we go on the web, we see them being advertised. So it's really just, we can add that in.
Yeah, I add in VRBO and perhaps HomeAway, just as the major ones that the majority of these online businesses are. Those are the ones I use.
Anything else on page 3? Page 4 is basically the definitions of permitted use, etc. 5, permitted or conditional, etc. One question I had is, what is BP? we've got the RER1.
BP.
What's BP? I didn't have a chance
It's
to look
called
it
the
up.
Business and Professional Zone. Looking at the zoning map, I am unable to find a single parcel in the city of Middleton that is zoned BP. One of the things that down the road, I think we will be doing after we get through the comp plan is, we have probably 2 or 3 zoning districts.
Scientific district, I think
You
is.
don't know why they exist?
Well, that used to be for Marathon. Marathon had the scientific district.
Yes.
That's gone now.
And so we will probably be coming to you at some point with actually a recommendation that we eliminate some of these zoning districts because.
Let's just take care of it right here. Just
I don't think you can do that. Go ahead.
I was curious about the decision to make like bed and breakfasts and the rooming board house conditional, but not the short term.
The reason is that the short term, because it's going to require a license, we looked at another option, which would have been to actually have the short term mimic the bed and breakfast. And as we discussed this with the council said, well, rather than having a conditional use permit process, can we do something more like Golden with a licensing process? Which is why you see on the prior page, you see this PS 18, which is the connection into the licensing requirements for short-term rentals. But with bed and breakfast, traditionally those aren't like licensed, those are treated as a use. And so we tried to look at other cities, and in most places, in your residential non-multifamily zones, they're allowed, but they're allowed as a conditional use. So you have some control over things like parking, excessive noise. Some bed and breakfasts, for example, will allow weddings and wedding receptions to be done there. Well, that might be okay on an occasional basis, but if I was a neighbor and there was a wedding reception done every weekend, that might become an issue. So we wanted to preserve some ability to have regulatory authority. But again, I would not be surprised that in a year we come to you with this land use chart and say we ought to make some tweaks here and there. The land use chart in the city has not really had much updating. So with all due respect, there's a lot of tweaking that needs to be done.
Let's see, Carter presidency is when most of the work was done on the zoning code and the use table. So, what does that tell you? In the use charts, if you could put the headings on each page.
Yes, we would do that.
I don't want to fumble back trying to figure out, does R3 allow this?
Yeah, I copied it from the existing code, which doesn't have the headings on the page.
Great.
But we will
Don't do
that. That really makes sense to have the headings on each page, so we'll replicate that.
Small things.
And one use chart. Just the transitional zone district also allows residential uses, the T transitional, and it doesn't look like any of these proposed uses are available in the transitional. I guess I suggest just look and see whether any of the rooming houses or short-term rentals are appropriate for that zone district, which includes residential.
We can do that. I mean, one of the things that's an interesting district in our code because it's meant to be a transition between intensive commercial uses and residential. And yet we allow
And it permits,
a lot of residential uses, which we even do in our business park industry. And business, so we're trying to also keep that thought in mind that generally you don't mix residential and industrial uses in an industrial, more of a transitional zone, but we will look at that.
Actually be the best place. What you're suggesting is it should be allowed in the T-zone?
Well, or wherever there's a single-family residential, if you're talking short-term rentals, because those are typically a short, but maybe some of these other things are appropriate for that, because I think of a T-zone as maybe being on more of a collector or arterial street where, staying short-term might not mind that noise.
Okay. We will definitely look at that.
Page 6, we start to get into the meat of it here. Any comments? I'm just curious, planning commissioners, what do you, well, since we're on this page, what do you think about primary residence being the only way to have a short-term rental versus allowing anybody to have one license regardless of where they live.
I think you should allow anybody regardless of where they live.
You think that should be?
Yeah.
I think it's challenging from both an enforceability standpoint and real hardship, like the example of somebody spending half the year in Arizona and half the year here.
Okay.
Who's to say that the primary residence is here or there? This limits one per owner, right? So one per owner in the city, although I could see somebody who has a primary residence in Englewood that could purchase an investment property in Littleton and just rent it out all year round and be legal. Right? So there's probably more availability of short-term rentals and less, I think in the communities where they're really limiting, like Denver, I think is limited. You have to reside in that for 10 months out of the year. It has to be a primary residence. That's the idea, is to provide more housing and keep affordability of that housing, more stock available.
That's working really well.
Yeah. It goes back to enforceability, I think.
And I think that certainly becomes a concern if we begin to see that rents are going up and we'll begin to see a lack of regular rental property, then obviously I think that becomes a concern in this community. Right now, I don't think we don't have any evidence to indicate that we're seeing that, but that's something that we'll have to keep a very close track of, is what is the nature of the rental market in this community, and is it becoming a short-term rentals negatively affecting that?
Get around the possibility of you have a company, it's called XYZ, they get their one license.
Yes.
And then they, same people, they form another company called ZQX, and they get their one. You just keep renaming different companies, different bank accounts, blah, blah, different IRS, and then you get your one license. You could end up with 10 or 15 properties.
That is something the council talked about. So and the council kind of went back and forth. There was some discussion that we should limit this to only, the legal term is real people. Corporations are what we view as artificial people because they're created by law. And that we would just limit it to actual individuals. Then the question is, well, what if my house is owned by a partnership? Or what if my house is owned I do have a small business and I've incorporated, and I put my house because I have a home occupation in my business's name. And so, again, there are cities that do that, to say no corporation can have a short-term rental, you have to be either a person or a partnership, and those are the only two entities, because a partnership doesn't have any legal status, it's basically the two people combined. And that those are the only entities that can get a license.
Is that what Barry did here right now? That designation? Partnership or individual?
We could certainly do that and add that in.
But a trust. Will trust be part of that?
And then like a trustee or a trust will be treated as an individual, and we could certainly do that, because I mean that certainly is something.
A lot of property owners that own multiple properties will form an LLC for each property.
Yes.
So, I'm just thinking about
it cuts both ways.
I really want to do that because that owner could have a very viable short-term rental in one of his LLC properties.
I think we also have to look at how the neighborhood is going to respond to this. I respect the idea of making people have viable businesses, but neighbors who live here, that's their home, have got a lot of concerns about not having an owner occupied. And maybe we can combine a couple of things, like what John said earlier, if if we allow it to have it where the person doesn't have to live there, you limit it to that they have to have a minimum of the 4-night stay. But we have to be considering the neighborhoods and the people who live there. That's their home. And we need to respect that too. So some kind of combination of allowing businesses to thrive and to keep homeowners also in our sights for a win-win and not just a business only.
Well, to boil it down to, your rights for free enterprise will go up against my right as a adjoining property owner. I have certain rights too as the adjoining property. I didn't buy into my neighborhood thinking that it would be in and out every 2 days. The college buddies come in and do their kegger on the front lawn of the vacation or the Airbnb.
And I think we just need to consider those restrictions to protect the homeowners around them, not just trying to make the businesses have all the...
That's the issue that came up in the Littleton paper, was short-term rental, and the adjacent property owners were planning big, huge parties. They just had a big backyard or something. And suddenly, Friday and Saturday nights, there's like bonfire in the backyard and keggers out there.
Karaoke night, it's happened in our neighborhood a few times.
Yeah, karaoke nights. It's just, that's the issue that can crop up here and there. It doesn't mean you need to ban it in the whole community. Yeah, I think there's arguments on both sides, but for the property owners, it's generally a good thing to have that option to do.
Those are good comments. We'll take them all and try to figure out some ideas around it.
So I had one question on 7.
On 7? Or
Yeah.
did we finish with 6? You guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? 7?
Okay, 7.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
7, I had on 13, the last part. The licensee shall provide to each short-term rental customer a copy of the city's noise, trash, and I would say, and any specific homeowner association restrictions.
The only thing is, we don't necessarily have HOA documents, but the reason we use related regulations is we would expect that this is adopted. We're going to put together a packet that will be for short-term rentals, and we'll say, here's a packet of the city's current regulations that you need to have.
Same packet can go to the near neighbors.
And the same packet could even go to your neighbor's yes. I mean, the idea would be that we would just come up with a packet that we could just publish, and just be like a small book, something like this. That
More than 3 pages, it's too much.
3 pages, it would just be published, and when you came in and got your license, you would get you could get a box of those for your renters.
So that brings up a good point, in that people who do VRBO short-term rentals well don't have issues with their neighbors. Some people, they're new and they just do it. They don't have maybe the skill set or the awareness of how to do a short-term rental in a way that makes it easy for the short-term renters to understand how to properly rent this place and to be courteous to the neighbors. I go to great extents in the ones I do to give all kinds of detailed instructions so that I never have any problems. I've been doing it for over 10 years. In my same association, there's new property owners who are starting to rent out because they're seeing what I've done and they're starting to do it. And they're creating all kinds of problems because they don't provide these detailed instructions. And so I think the city could really provide a huge resource by doing a little homework and providing kind of a template for potential homeowners that want to do the short-term rental on how to do it correctly.
That's what we were talking about exactly earlier, right? Like how we try to do education around weeds and other things. Like this could be another one of those exactly kind of like how to be a good neighbor, right? And put some pamphlet together and say, here's what you have to mean, and then here's what we recommend.
And we'll play music of 10, it's just things, basic things, but they need to be reminded, it's like, read this before you arrive at the property, don't leave the porch light on it, and things like that make a difference.
I mentioned, the licensing requirements should be kept simple, but for example, you require, I noticed here, a map of the residence. You could provide in this little packet a sample drawing. It doesn't require professional. It can be done a simple drawing showing the driveway of the house. So you provide a sample. So it's kept simple, and like I say, you don't have to hire a professional. You can go right up and down the line with the requirements. Keep them simple and illustrative.
Regarding the parking, Steve, you had mentioned in your initial presentation that may need to be worked up a little bit more. I would agree with the way it's written that the parking requirement shouldn't be different than what would normally be required of that, but that some sort of condition be imposed upon the short-term rentals agency, whatever, to identify the limits, along the same lines of other, the maps and the template, that parking be somehow controlled by the person who's in control there.
And on page 8, we actually, one of the requirements for the licenses, that one must submit a site plan of the property to provide detailed information. And we're not looking at a professionally designed site plan. We're looking more at what would be a sketch plan that you could have. You yourself could draw, but the idea is to provide us sufficient information to be able to identify whether you've met all these conditions.
I guess my main point is if you keep it simple, you'll get compliance. If they're looking at it, like in Denver, they probably have 82 pages of agony. They said, heck with it, just get off the grid and do what they want.
And that's one of the things that there was a recent article in the Denver Business News where they estimate that they only have 50% compliance with their short-term rental regulations. And we certainly would prefer not to be in that position.
So I have a question on the safety requirements under 10.
Yes.
So what page are you on?
Same page.
Still on 7.
7.
Okay.
Page 7, number 10. My background is also in some emergency management, and I'm looking at the fire extinguisher. And is this fire extinguisher, are they going to have something in the kitchen where a lot of fires occur that's easy to see? Something on each floor? Because these are people coming into home they don't know about, and a fire extinguisher it's something good for them to know where they are.
Well, they would also have to comply under 12. They have to comply with the fire code that's adopted. So if the fire code required, for example, an extinguisher on each floor, then they're going to have that. So they're going to have to, we sort of identified specific items. One of the things that we have found is sometimes in rentals and other places, we have found that people choose not to have inspections. So really 10 and 12 need to be read together because you will have to comply with all the terms of the fire code. And any other international codes that the city has adopted, such as International Property Maintenance Code and all those.
Like a smoke detector inside each bedroom, and then a carbon monoxide detector immediately outside the bedroom hallway.
Yes.
That's requirement.
That's a
You
requirement.
have no choice. You will do that when you do buildings or remodels. Anything else on 7?
Yeah, on number 5 there on page 7, number of short-term rentals per lot, that might need some massaging if we have situations where there are condominiums for like a condominium plat. For example, the townhomes on Nevada or the condos there, if someone wanted to use one of those units and the HOA allowed it, there are multiple units on a single lot in that situation. And there may also be some townhomes that are set up where the townhome is actually, a condo map as opposed to a platted lot.
We'll go back and look at that because there are, in this city in particular, since we haven't had a condo platting process where individual condominiums are platted, we could actually have some of those. Now, the future will be once the subdivision code comes to council and we have a condo planning process, you wouldn't be able to do that. All the condominiums would have to be platted in each condo. But we do need to look at that.
Super technical stuff.
Are we on 8 now?
I believe we are on 8, Mr.
Anything on 8?
Item 3 would be, it has the annual fee 25. I think your slide said 50.
It's 20. Yeah, the slides were incorrect. It's 25
It's 25, okay.
is the proposal.
And then on page 9, there's a fee of 20, but that's a different fee.
Yes, that's for the business license. There's 2 fees, a business license fee and a short-term rental license fee.
I hate fees, but I think at 25, you need to look at that a little close. Maybe you can find out what this company charges per short-term rental if you're going to turn it over enforcement to them. They charge 50 or $100, and well, you're not going to be a money loser for the first year.
And we certainly will be doing that because part of the whole fee study that the city is doing is to look at exactly these types of things. And so my guess is we will be back probably next year with changes in this fee as well as anything else, because we know that the council's committed that our fees are going to actually recover our costs. So there's already a commitment and directive by council, which is why we're doing the fee study.
Let's talk about just quickly the application that's yearly. Does anybody think of doing it bi-yearly, just to save on the agony of paperwork, or do you want to have just a little more enforcement with the yearly?
We desire a little bit more enforcement, and plus from a practical standpoint, when we are doing things on a calendar year basis, it's actually much easier for us to manage. So we looked at doing it every other year, and we just decided that on an annual basis, it fits in the best with how the city manages other things.
You have to provide the map every year, or this or that, or is it just
No,
basically?
the intent would be on the renewal that you would only have to provide more indicate on the application. You'd only have to provide any information that's changed.
Okay.
I think the other thing it helps too, Mark, is if we're dealing with a situation where we've had a lot of problems, right, with a license.
Yeah, you don't let it fester for 2 years or something. Yeah.
You have the ability to.
Anything else on 8? Home stretch here, 9 is very short. Anything on 9? Okay. Any closing general comments anybody wants to make?
Has staff heard any, like HOAs banning short-term rentals, or, I don't know if there's complaints or?
Most of the HOAs I'm aware of have not added anything to their codes, covenants, and restrictions. Frankly, this is one of these areas that's a fairly new area, and I wouldn't be surprised if we were in areas that are having a lot of growth, like maybe Castle Rock or Lone Tree. You might have new HOAs that actually include bands. But here at Middleton, most of our HOAs have been long established, and I just don't think that they, particularly the residential ones, have given much thought to maybe going back and looking at their CC&Rs. And sometimes that can get very cumbersome as well.
Are there any pushback on motels? This is intruding on their turf. Any comments from Littleton hotels, motels?
We have not heard anything. I think the biggest concern, in some respects, I think they will actually like it because the definitions are clearer for them, and we're not really changing where they can locate. I think, so they will like it. I think from the city standpoint, it will actually be better because it will give us a tool to say, okay, if you're a hotel, we expect these types of amenities, and if you don't have those, maybe you're not a hotel at all. And I think it would give us a little bit more of a bargaining chip as well, which isn't a bad thing.
So thanks, we'll take all
See
of
none.
that
Okay.
under consideration, so thank you.
Interesting conversation. This is one of those items when we were working on the use table that we
tabled any discussion on short-term rentals because it was probably one of 15 items that we didn't want to get into.
You probably will see in
I
about
know.
3 or 4 months, another division of the use table on recreational uses, which is another whole.
We have to tackle them one by one.
Yes.
Not going away.
It's another whole mess that we'll be coming back to you on. That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you.